Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's very special episode. We have a different voice on the podcast today. Christine Vanderpool, the CISO at Florida Crystals, will be joining me momentarily, and we've got an awesome episode full of great concepts, ideas, best practices, and so much more. So we'll be right back after this message from our sponsors. Hey friends, want to talk to you guys about our new sponsor PlexTrack and its founder Dan Klaus. So Dan Klaus founded PlexTrack after 15 years of fighting with reporting and vulnerability management tools as a penetration tester and CISO. Dan knew that the best red teams not only needed a way to produce good, consistent reports quickly, but also wanted to be able to generate and catalyze the success of the organization they work with. That's why PlexTrack went beyond customizing Word and PDF reports to become a purple teaming platform. Through a central interface, red teams are able to report issues, blue teams are able to remediate them, and the CISO gets an overview of everything that's going on so he can report it up to his board, his stakeholders, and anyone involved in the organization on a consistent basis. As a CyberHub Engage listener, you get the opportunity to try PlexTrack for absolutely free for 1 month. No contracts, no credit cards, no risk, none at all. Simply go to plextrack.com/CyberHub. Again, that's plextrack.com/CyberHub. PLEXTRAC, no K in plextrack.com/CyberHub to claim your free month free now. Make sure you support our friends at PlexTrack. They have a great platform for all of you that are pen testers and red and blue teams. Make sure you check them out again. plextrack.com, no K in plextrack/CyberHub. Hey everyone, I really want you to help me in supporting our early sponsor, Get SmartEye. So Get SmartEye still in beta testing, but what Get SmartEye is, it's an amazing app that lets you control your privacy, whether it be documents, pictures, anything that you want to share with your friends or not. Think of Snapchat, only no screenshots and no one else looking over it. So if you travel a lot, if you're in airports, coffee shops, shared workspaces, and you care about your privacy, Get SmartEye is the right app for you to protect your privacy. And here's the deal. Get SmartEye is still in beta testing. I use the app all the time. In fact, some of you know that I travel a lot, and when I do, I don't like people looking at my screen at airports. I do everything off my phone, and as such, I use Get SmartEye for all my sensitive documents and all my planning. So here's what you need to do to be one of our early technology adapters, an exclusive offer for CyberHub Engage listeners. Text 41411, again, that's 41411, 41411, and type in the message of your text, SmartEye. Then reply to the SMS that you're going to get with the letter Y, like Yankee, and download the Apple Test Flight app. Then go back to your SMS and you'll get a link to download the SmartEye app. Download the SmartEye app and use it. Again, this is an early offer for only CyberHub Engage users. Text 41411. Again, that's 41411 with SmartEye in the message. Folks, I want to take a moment and talk to you about CyberHub USA, one of our longest sponsors. So for full disclosure, before we get started, I want you to know I am a partner at CyberHub USA. That's why our podcast is called the CyberHub Engage Podcast. But if it wasn't for my partner support, I wouldn't have been able to deliver the content that we do each and every single day. But let me talk a bit about what CyberHub USA does and how it can benefit you and your organization. CyberHub USA are cyber business operation experts. They help bridge business and cybersecurity to enhance a company's security posture through so many different ways of doing so. As a boutique advisory and consulting firm, they work with CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, CEOs, and board members on identifying the proper and right cybersecurity strategy and do everything in between, from creating work plans to identifying the right vendors, to helping in budgeting, to ensuring third-party viability, to helping with tabletop exercises and preparedness for the day when it happens, not if. CyberHub USA has a team of experts from all over the globe that's ready to deploy at a moment's notice to help any organization deal with the most complex or even the most basics of cybersecurity challenges. You can find out more by going to cyberhubusa.co. Again, cyberhubusa.co, cyberhubusa.co, and you can get a free consultation with one of CyberHub USA's experts for absolutely free by mentioning the CyberHub Engage podcast. Again, cyberhubusa.co, cyberhubusa.co. Get a free consultation for free with one of CyberHub USA's experts, absolutely free by mentioning the CyberHub Engage podcast. And now back to the show. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Well, I'm very happy that you've come on the show. So, Christine, you're the CISO at Florida Crystals. You're also on the Avanta CISO governing body for South Florida, or the entire state of Florida?
Well, it's the entire state of Florida. Actually.
It's the entire state of Florida.
Yeah.
Florida has been divided to South Florida and North Florida. And I'm just waiting for that line to be drawn in the sand, right? Like in the swamps of dividing right. Florida, like North and South Carolina or Virginia and West Virginia. You're just waiting for that to happen. But happy Thanksgiving. So we are post-Thanksgiving. We're like the countdown to Christmas madness and fourth quarter. And so it's always a crazy time of the year for CISO. So I appreciate you taking the time to kind of be on the podcast today. But quickly, would you mind? Well, not quickly. Take your time. But it's fresh to have a woman CISO on the podcast. I have to say that. I think I told you that when we were kind of talking on the phone. It's there aren't a lot of you out there. So being able to kind of catapult and talk about some of the great stuff that you're doing. But tell us a little bit about how you got into cyber. What was your career trajectory into cyber?
Yes, so I actually was a marketing major in college, and I hated computers. My dad is somewhere between a nuclear scientist and a computer engineer. So we had every, personal computer in our house since, the dawn of personal computers, and he was always tinkering with them. And I just was like, I never wanted to do that. I want to be cool. I don't want to be, a computer geek is what I perceived. But then senior year of college, I got an internship with Honeywell, and they were implementing this really new cutting edge system called an ERP system. They were implementing SAP. So they gave me a book and a computer, and they told me to learn it. And so that was really how I got into IT as a whole. I was lucky enough that IBM's hard disk drive business came and recruited where I went to college. And when they found out that in the late 90s, I not only knew what SAP was, but I'd been through a full-scale implementation, they said, you've got to come work for IBM. And, at 21, 22, who doesn't want to move to the Bay Area and work for Big Blue? So, of course, I said, sign me up. And my first role with them was on the SAP security team. So that was really what threw me into security to start, and then this 20-year career now in cybersecurity.
So in these 20 years in cybersecurity, I guess, what would you say, what has catapulted you into the role of a CISO? What do you think makes you kind of solidify yourself as a CISO? Because this isn't your first CISO role, correct?
No, this has been a CISO before, deputy CISO for a very, very large organization, and now a CISO again. I think what differentiates me is my ability to understand the business. I hate when people call it the business, because IT is part of the business as well. But my ability to understand the overarching goals and mission of an organization, and understand how IT and cybersecurity can play an integral role in that organization, and how they can actually help drive it forward rather than just be a barrier to the greater mission of the company. And I also understand the financial impacts. I perceive myself as a very big people person, and someone who really focuses on teams and team dynamics and making sure that the team is successful. So I think all of those things have sort of propelled me into that CISO role and helped me be successful in that.
What would you say is one of your biggest career hurdles in becoming a CISO?
At first, it was getting people to believe that I had the technical chops to do the role. I think it's important as a CISO to balance understanding that side, like I just talked about, but also you do have to know cybersecurity concepts. You have to understand technologies. You have to understand how it all works together. And so I think there was a large perception that maybe I didn't have the technical chops. So I really had to prove that to get them to see that I was ready to take on the role that really requires both of those parts.
It's always fascinating because I think we've interviewed over 60 different chief information security officers on the podcast. And I feel like everyone always has a different story of how they got into cyber. Some people who have, never even thought of going into security. Some people who security was part of their DNA from, military or whatnot, to kind of catapulting into that role of a CISO. And, I kind of want to transition a little bit because kind of talking about you a little bit, you just spoke about your technical chops. So let's talk a little technical stuff. So one of the things that, when you're doing SAP or you're doing anything is obviously identity access management. So when we talk about kind of identity access management, how are you establishing and managing your identity access management? What are some of your best practices around that?
It's funny you ask. I have to be honest and say I have yet to work on an identity and access management project that's gone rather well and been, wildly successful. I recently hosted a boardroom session where there was a gentleman who was going on and on about how great his IAM program was. And we were amazed. We were like, wow, how did you do that so successfully? And he's like, well, I've been in this role for 18 years and we have 1,000 employees. And it's like, so the key to good identity and access management is being very small and having 18 years to implement a program. Which is not realistic for the rest of us. It's a hard topic to really do successfully. And I think it's really driven because there's so many pieces and parts. And as you start to unravel something, you find out that for whatever reason, something was configured in a certain way that just makes it impossible. And really where it starts for me, what I believe is good HR practices, right? If you don't understand your employee base and who your people are in general, there's no technology that's going to come in and sort of fix this problem. It's got to start with the people and the processes on the HR side, really understanding how they onboard and offboard, really making sure that they have the same processes. What we find in large global organizations is that their HR processes that they follow to bring someone on board and set them up with original sort of birthright access rights is very different because of whatever reasons. They'll usually say, oh, it's because we're this country and we have these laws and legalizations, which is sometimes true, but there's always ways around it, right? So what you find is you dive into whatever systems you're currently using, like your Active Directory environment, or maybe you have an Employee Central type of environment, is that there's different fields that are populated for different sets of employees, and it's sometimes the same field is used in different manners depending on which HR department is onboarding someone. So it makes sort of having this one cohesive view of who a person is, start to finish, very hard to grasp and get your hands around. So I think sometimes we come in with a technology trying to solve this problem, and then halfway through the project, you realize it's a really hard problem to solve because you haven't solved the upstream processes around HR, because that's really where the data's got to start, right? They're the ones who know who's coming in and going out through the door. And then on top of that, you have the complexity usually around your augmented staff, your consultants, your part-time workers, because sometimes they won't be in an HR system. A lot of times they're not. So, there's so many moving pieces and parts. It's a very, very hard egg to crack without, shattering it into 1,000 pieces and having just messy egg all over your counter, right? And so I think it's really got to start with that strong partnership and understanding between cybersecurity teams, IT teams, and HR teams to really get at what they're trying to do too. Are they trying to resolve just understanding what an identity is? Are they trying to manage access? Are they trying to just make it more seamless for people to log on to things? Because I think that's the other problem too. Identity and access management is multiple parts to it. It's not just one thing, right? There's the identity part, there's the access part, and there's the ease of use and log on single sign-on type of logon activities that we group into IAM, and really they're very different problems. So you have to sort of consider each one and decide how you're going to solve for each one.
It feels like, whenever I talk to CISOs about identity access management, it always comes down to, well, like you said, if you have 18 years to do something and you've got 1,000 employees, well, shit, you're obviously going to have you're obviously going to be a master at it. It's the people who do identity access management for 25 employees and go, I've mastered it. And I'm like, you don't have to deal with the complexities that involve a 10, 20, 50, 100,000 person organization. Some people who work remotely, some people who need access from multiple different devices, who are constantly kind of intertwining and interchanging. Have you found one kind of specific problem in identity access management that you really that has no solution maybe, or you can't find a good solution for right now? Is there one part of it that's just you're like, I can't find anything that solves this specific problem?
I think the one thing is just truly that cohesive view of what one's identity is, right? You have to have a single source of truth for it, and it has to start somewhere. It can't really, like I said, start with IT, because IT is the last person to know things sometimes, right? And especially now that you've got a lot of shadow IT that goes on with all these various SaaS applications. A business unit or function can set up their own agreement if you don't have good procurement processes and other upstream processes to start using an online tool. Well, guess what? There's going to be identities inside those tools. People are going to have access to those tools. And if they're not integrated with however you're managing your identity schema overall, you're never going to know about those. So then you put yourself at liability risks with over licensing, or when people are terminated or they leave, that they'd still have access to that SaaS application. So I think it's really, the root of it is just really trying to figure out how we can figure out what somebody's true identity is across the board.
When you talk about identity, a lot of times in identity access management, we always talk about the internal. How do you build identity, and how do you establish truth for third-party people who need to access your data, access your systems, plug in? What are because this year, we're wrapping up 2019, it's December, but if we look back at this year, it's been the year of third-party breaches, right? Everything started somewhere downstream and went upstream and compromised someone big. How do you start to manage identity access management with, your third-party vendors who you may not be able to vet their employees or vet their technology or really be able to properly identify the risks that evolve with that? How do you even begin to manage that risk?
Well, I truly think you need good, legal counsel and good agreements in place, because it does get tricky. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how solid your legal agreements are with your SaaS providers and your cloud infrastructure providers, because in the public's eye, they don't understand that, it was this other party who was the one at fault for whatever happened, right? It's your brand, you own it, you're ultimately responsible for it. So I think you really have to make sure that when you're talking one-for-one about, cloud environments, that you're doing what you can do to have visibility into that cloud and control who has access to that cloud. And then when you're talking a SaaS, really having a CASB that can help you control what access people have in that cloud, and then making sure that SaaS provider, if then they're also, in a public cloud infrastructure, that they have cloud visibility and that you're able to see some of that information so that at least you can obtain visibility. You may not have control, but the key is at least trying to get some visibility into who is accessing what, where, when, how, so that you can paint that picture, right? So those are some of the keys I would say to consider when working with various SaaS and various public cloud infrastructure providers.
So we talk identity access management. Obviously, that translates into having the right SOC in place or the right monitoring in place to identify anomalies and be able to address them kind of immediately. So, you've served as a CISO and a deputy CISO in so many roles in your career. So what kind of organizations really do need a SOC, and what's the right time to maybe outsource it if you can't do it internally?
I would say every organization needs a SOC. The bad guys don't go to sleep at night, so we need people with 20 eyes on glass, 24/7, 365. Especially because most businesses now are 365, 24/7 as well. So if your operations are, you need to be as well. And even if not, if you do happen to have the luxury of being, maybe a 8 to 8 sort of environment. Again, attacks are still happening at night. So you don't want to come in first thing in the morning and realize you've been hit by ransomware, right? So always being aware of what's going on and being able to have someone help you and identify threats right at the moment things are happening is very critical. I realize, a shop of 25 people or a company of 25 people really can't. But when you're talking a substantial company that has, several thousand employees of at least a couple $1 million in revenue and stuff, those you really do need to start considering how you're going to have sort of this 24/7 view of what's going on in your environment. I think when it comes to whether you have an internal SOC versus an external SOC, it's really all about the size of your company, the scale of your company, the competencies of your IT department, and how much you're willing to spend. Because if you're going to spin up your own, you've got to spin up all that tooling internally. You've got to be able to support it, and you've got to be able to run it 24/7, which is a very expensive, very time-consuming activity. So I find that for most organizations, it's probably not reasonable for them to have their own internal SOC. It doesn't mean that they can't have people that are part of the overall SOC design, right? They can be internal and be part of the SOC, even if the SOC is then maybe managed off hours by someone else, or, they're sort of the third level support for the SOC, right? And I think that's the cool thing about using a service provider, right? If you're the level 3 SOC, your internal employees are the level 3 SOC type of people, then they're the ones who are bringing sort of that extra level of knowledge and going, they're more integral in knowing how exactly your company works. So you definitely need those internal resources, because at the end of the day, some things cannot be handled by a third-party service provider because they just don't know your organization as well as you do, as well as someone internally is going to know it. But the beauty is then internally it gets you the ability to hire that sort of higher level staff, right? And when you're hiring someone who's 5-10 years into cybersecurity and has a really good knowledge base, and you're giving them strategic work to work on or more complex work to work on, you're more likely to keep them. Because what we find too is if you have an internal SOC and you have those level 1, level 2, it's hard for you to necessarily have a clear trajectory for their career path, right? And so they may feel a little more stunted than if they worked for an MSSP who has already built in a career development path procedure to make sure that they don't have that churn, right? So what I find with internal SOCs is you are going to probably have more churn than as a CISO. What you end up dealing with is a lot of, just hiring and offboarding activities, because you're constantly trying to keep bodies in chairs. So if you're with a partner, you're letting them worry about the bodies in the chair. As long as, through your engagement process with MSSPs, you're asking them what their turnover rate is and how they're engaging and how they make sure that they're keeping their employees. Because we see this overall in cyber as an issue. But I find if your internal people are, like I said, that third level, then you can really start to show where their career can progress in the future. And maybe they will be more engaged and see greater possibilities for them in the future to further their career, whether it be into an architect type role, a security architect type role, an incident responder type role, or incident commander type role, or even a CISO someday, right? So I think that's the beauty of having a partner. But I think when it comes down to whether you do internal or external, it really comes down to each individual company's needs, expectations, financial capabilities, and expertise and knowledge.
You bring up that was such a loaded answer. I'm like jotting down notes, and Mike is screaming at me. He's like, I can hear you write down on the mic. Throw it over. Oh, there we go. All right, now I got something so it won't make noise. But I kind of want to go and address a few of the things and kind of ask you to go into a little bit more detail on it, because you gave such a good loaded answer, and there's a few places where I really want to dig a bit deeper. And one of them is, when you're looking at the size of organizations, does size really matter for a SOC? Because if you're a 25-man shop, but you're working with the Fortune 100s, right? You kind of almost need to have a SOC, right? I mean, that's almost going to be a prerequisite for a lot of them to work with you. So does the size, does size really matter for a SOC, or is it the business type and the kind of business that a business does? Because I feel like that's a misconception.
That is true. You bring up a very good point there. It is dependent upon the business that you're in. Obviously, if you're providing a SaaS type solution, then yeah, you need a SOC, right? You need that. I was thinking more along the lines of a traditional, maybe manufacturing or a mom and pop type retail organization, or maybe you own a bunch of franchisees. And so more along those lines. But yes, if you're dealing in any sort of environment where you are supporting much larger organizations, you're right. It doesn't matter if you're, a 25-man shop or a 250,000-man shop, you are going to need that, because your customers are going to demand that and need that. So that's a great distinction, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because you're 100% right there.
So that kind of takes us to the next part, which is what you talked about, and I find that on every podcast we have this conversation: the churn, the HR shortage. I feel a lot of the SOC is now going into a lot of automation. So do you feel like this kind of churn in the SOC is going to continue, or do you feel as more automation comes in, we're going to end up hiring not the 22-year-old analyst, but the 25-year-old, like you said, level 3 guy who's going to come in after maybe working for a vendor for a few years and being able to contribute to the business? Where do you see kind of the churn kind of ending, I would say, in the SOC?
I do think if we automate, the more and more we can automate, obviously that's going to impact the amount of churn, because you don't need as many bodies in chair, right? You've taken away that, and we've seen that throughout traditional IT as well, right? So as soon as a process can be automated, you don't need as many people, because you've let the machine take over and the machine do it. But it doesn't mean that there won't be a skill set gap and a need for a different type of technologist, right? Because that automation is still a machine and can still break, right? And so instead of being the analyst, to your point, who's looking through the alerts that are coming in through a SIM, you now need people on staff who understand the automation and orchestration behind those alerts to make sure that they don't go awry and they don't break, right? Can you imagine if all of a sudden, for whatever reason, there was an alert and it was really a false positive, but the machine believed it was real and just started shutting things down, right? So you're still going to always need a person, right? I think sometimes we believe we can live in this completely automated world without people, but at the end of the day, machines break just like people break. And so you have to have oversight of the machines that can jump in and fix things. So it's a different skill set. It's a different tooling, if you will. But the key is there will always be the need for those people once something can't be automated or when something can't be determined as fully a false positive, you're still going to have eyes on glass. And those people are really going to have to understand the full workflow end to end to figure out where the problem is, right? And so, again, I think it just changes the level of people that we need. Will we need as many? Probably not, but we'll need higher skill. So then the question becomes, how do we make it so there's a career progression and path? People are getting the skill sets that they need to handle what they're going to have to support, knowing that the things that made them that next level employee are now done by a machine. So they don't get the sort of hands-on experience doing those things that then progress them.
That's such a good point, which is you can't automate everything. And I fully support your statement of we're always going to need humans, because I don't feel like, at least not in the next 10, 15, 20 years, that machines can completely replace a human's eye in recognizing specific attack patterns, because machines, as we've seen, can be fooled. That's the whole, you're a marketing major. So SEO is all about manipulating search engines so that you rank higher in searches. And that's, humans fooling a machine. And there's people who do it very, very well. So it's not to be discounted that in security, machines can do all of that. I completely agree with you. So how do you succeed with an outsourced SOC? Because that's one of the major challenges, as you said, is an outsourced SOC is your outside vendor. They don't live and breathe your company. They don't understand the different challenges. Sometimes they're so far behind, they're overworked, they're understaffed. You don't really always know what's going on in a SOC that's not under your control, right? How do you succeed with working with an outsourced SOC?
Well, it's definitely vendor relationship management. You have to be in there with your vendors, talking to them all the time, being upfront and honest with them too, making sure you have strong SLAs, making sure you have good contracts in place so that you can hold their feet to the fire. But you want to have an open and honest relationship with them, and you don't want to always just default to it's your fault. I usually find that when things are going wrong with a vendor, and it doesn't matter if it's an MSSP or your external SOC or whether it's your, HR application, vendor that you're working with, it comes down to a lot of blame game. I find that when something goes wrong, the company that's using the service wants to blame the service provider, and the service provider is like, well, you didn't tell me this, that, or the other. So I think it's making sure you have the right channels in place to come together as a team when you need to, and be honest with each other and say, look, we both are probably at fault here. We both have issues that we need to resolve. So let's just not even go there with the blame game. Let's just figure out what the root cause was, what the issues are, and how we're going to resolve those, and how we're going to work together as a team. So that we all feel like there's some teamwork going on, because this team isn't your team and they are ancillary to your team. So, but you have to make them feel like they're part of your team. You want to pick the provider too that's right for you and your organization. You got to go through that lengthy process to do the bake-offs, to see who is the right size for you, who has similar corporate culture as you. If you align with a strategic vendor that aligns with your own company's missions and vision and goals, I find that it is easier to have that partnership, right? And then making sure that they never feel like they have you by the heels, I think is also important, right? That they know and they understand that they can't take you for granted, right? Sometimes as we start to outsource things, we outsource so much that vendor knows they've got you, right? For you to walk away from them, it is going to take, a lot of money and a lot of time. So you want to make sure you never put yourself, your organization, into that position where they do have you, sort of locked down. If you think of it, it's like a marriage, right? You want to make sure that, you're both contributing, you're both still able to be autonomous people apart from each other, right? That you're not staying in this unhealthy relationship just because of money reasons, or, what other reasons people stay in relationships that they shouldn't, right? So I think you have to look at it like that. You have to almost look at it as a marriage, and you have to make compromises, and you have to understand where they're coming from and you're coming from. And if you look at it in that manner, and you find that partner that you're willing to go on this journey with, and you set those expectations up front, and you realize that over time, as you do change as an organization, or in the marriage analogy, as a person, that you're still continuing to have open lines of communication and making sure that they understand why the changes are occurring, and we're able to flex and morph and make sure that that partnership is still the right partnership and a good partnership to go forward with. So I think those are some of the keys to think about when deciding what partner to use.
Would you offshore your SOC?
I guess ours in a sense is offshore because it's not in the United States. I think, again, it just depends on your industry, the legalities around it, if you can even do that, if that's okay, depending upon what line of business you're in. But I don't see why not to. There's really good security operations centers that are in all different kinds of countries, right? So again, it really just depends on your organization and what your organization needs.
I love that. You're like, you very well handled that last one, because most people will go, I'll never offshore. And I feel like you're absolutely right. I think if you're going to offshore, just know where you're offshoring and the legalities of it, and that you have repercussions. I mean, I wouldn't offshore to China anything at this point, but hell, I wouldn't even buy from China. And it's very difficult to do at this point in our lives, but that's very difficult. I kind of want to transition from that SOC to cyber as a service.
Okay.
I feel like that's the next big thing that's coming. So we talked about outsourced SOCs, and that's kind of like a part of cyber as a service. But what should really vendors know about this cyber as a service model that so many CISOs are now looking at? Because, you hear about it a lot, right? I have a lot of friends who are in the vendor game. So they'll be like, I'm getting a POC, and I'm like, that doesn't mean you're getting the business. And we hosted a roundtable. I think I told you about this when we were on our call a few weeks ago. And I asked, the CISOs that were in the room, I said, how much does a POC cost us? Yeah, it doesn't cost you anything from a vendor technology, but it costs you time, money, implementation, and so forth. So if we were to accumulate that cost, how much would that be? So what is this model as cyber as a service? What is it that you look at? And what is this whole thing about prepackaged services?
Yeah, so it's really working with your MSSP to figure out all the areas of your program that could potentially be given to you as a service. And what I mean by a prepackaged service is really, you don't care as the consumer of the service what tool is used. I mean, we do care, of course, because we all like our tools in cybersecurity, right? We're like, oh, tool, fun, toy.
Shiny box. Right?
But if you get away from the shiny box syndrome and you just look at it of what am I trying to achieve, right? Oh, I'm trying to achieve good EDR, endpoint detection and response, right? So that's what I'm focused on. So if you work with your service provider, who's most likely going to be your SOC. That's the other thing too, is find someone who can handle the majority of all the areas for you, right? Now, I'm not saying to only have one partner, one vendor, because again, back to my earlier statement, you can't make them think that they have you by the heels. So you always have to, let them know that you could still go out and find another, partner, another mate, if you had to, right? You got to make them realize that they really need to appreciate you, because there are other fish in the sea. So anyway, so I think it's good to have at least two strategic partners, but you don't want to have too many, because then all you're doing is managing vendor relationships, which is a nightmare as well. But the on-demand model is really about just going to your partner and saying, look, I want really good EDR, but I want you to do it for me, and I want you to do it as a service, and I don't care what tool you use. And also, if a year from now or 2 years from now, we're not really feeling that we're getting the value out of the tool that you're using to provide us this service, we want to be able to tell you to use a different tool that you also manage a service around, like a prepackaged service around EDR, right? As an example. That way I'm not tied into a particular tool set or a particular vendor, because what I'm seeing is every day there's so many new cybersecurity vendors. It's nonstop flood. And what one was good at yesterday, then all of a sudden they decide they're going to get into maybe the services game directly themselves as well, or maybe they're going to buy a competitor that's sort of ancillary to what their core tool does. And so they take their eye off the ball of their core competencies of whatever tool it was that they originally started with. And so all of a sudden their tool starts tanking as far as its capabilities and its ability to do what you bought it. But you're locked into it for like 3 to 5 years, depending on your procurement cycles and how long you have to depreciate if you bought it as a CapEx purchase, right? And so when you do that, you're all of a sudden captive to this tool. So if you look at it from a way of just buying it as a service, not necessarily tied to a specific tool, then you have more flexibility, right? It's no different than Uber or Lyft, right? I don't get in. I can choose whether I want a regular Uber, whether I want a carpool Uber, whether I want an XL Uber, but I can't really tell it that I want to be picked up in a Camaro, or I want to be picked up in a Cadillac Escalade, right? I just say, in general, this is the specifics of what sort of mode of transportation I need, right? I can't say that I want a female driver, or I guess I can cancel the ride if the specifics pop up that aren't what I want, right? But I have to just entrust that I'm buying this service on demand. I want to get from point A to point B, and that's my goal. And I want to get there safely. And I'm going to sort of entrust that they're going to do that. And they're going to do this with whatever vehicle is up next in the queue that meets my criteria. So it's this thinking about it in that same sort of similar form and fashion. So that gives us more flexibility. So when the next cool, shiny tool does come out, if the provider, if your partner can do their service on that new shiny tool, guess what? You can probably use that new shiny tool faster and easier than if you had to go through the procurement processes and setting up all the agreements and all the contracts and setting up new SLAs with that vendor. And I mean, think about all the paperwork that goes into setting up a new, contract.
I'm just thinking about the time. The time alone. Time costs so much money. That's kind of one of my pet peeves when I talk to a lot of different CISOs that tell me, "Oh, I'm doing 5 POCs this month," and I'm just, "What are you doing? Like, that's such a waste of resources." Like, and then we wonder why our posture dwindles with time, because we're letting all these different technologies and vendors in that we're forgetting to address our basics, our foundations, what makes us really secure. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100% agree with you.
So you've been really great so far in identifying our relationships with SOCs and MSSPs like relationships. So hence brings my next question. Why is it so hard for CISOs to commit to stuff long term? Why do they have that phobia? It's like if a vendor came down and proposed to you, you'd probably turn around and run.
I think it's twofold to me. One, because we are afraid that if we commit to this, something better is going to come along, right? We've seen it time and time again that, this is the coolest tool I've ever seen. And then next week, somebody else comes out with something that has 2 extra features. And you're like, man, if I'd only waited, like I could have really used those 2 extra features. And so we're always just waiting. We're always in this state of flux because so much is always rapidly changing with our vendor landscape in cybersecurity, right? That, I heard that there might be this new tool that's going to come out and it's going to have, the extra bells and whistles. So I'm not really sure if I can commit at this time, right? So I think that's part of the problem for sure. I think too, just the nature of who we are. We're very untrusting people. That's why we're in this world, right? So when a vendor comes and they say, I can solve world hunger, of course we're not going to believe them. right? And I think that's also back to your point, why we do so many POCs, right? It's like we want to go on these continuous dates to figure out,
Well,
which one is the right
but
one,
dating
right?
is the funnest part of the relationship. It's also the most expensive part of the relationship.
That is very true, right? So that's the thing. But I do just think as a natural characteristic or a trait of somebody in cybersecurity, you don't trust anyone, and you do have a fear of commitment because tomorrow your entire world could be completely different, right? There could be the latest and greatest new attack, and all of a sudden you were so focused on, say, insider threat, but then again, now all of a sudden there's this new type of, say, virus or ransomware or who knows what that's out there that's just got everybody consumed, right? And so I think because we're very squirrel too, oh, squirrel, it's really hard for us to stay focused and say, no, I'm going to stick to my guns. I know in my heart of hearts that this is the right answer and this is where we need to be focused and this is the right tool or the right solution for this problem, and I'm going to stick with it. It's just very hard for who we are as people.
But I think that also what makes the companies that have been 10 plus years in this business a better partner than a lot of these new startups that come and go. I've been kind of monitoring part of this as part of our podcast, and I'll see a company that starts off with one solution, and then 6 months later, I'll get, the newsletter, an email, and it'll be, I'll open it up and they'll be like, we not only do this now, we do this, this, and this. And you're like, yeah, but none of those go together. So did you develop 3 other products instead of focusing on your core? Or what exactly is it? And it's very, very difficult to ascertain with a new company as to, are they really going to be around for the duration of this agreement? Are they going to be able to develop the product at a pace and speed and be the right company to support my business? Because as a CISO, we're all taking risks by hiring them. Yes, right? I mean, it's our jobs that's on the line, because if something happens, they're not getting fired. We are.
Right. I really wish a lot of vendors would stop trying to do just that, and they would find strategic partners themselves where they offer comprehensive end-to-end solutions that make sense by utilizing partnerships with other strategic players rather than trying to do it all themselves, right? It's very similar in other lines of business, right? You don't want to stray too far from your core competencies, because then you lose sight of who you are as a company. And it's really hard to have a singular mission and vision if you're doing things that are totally unrelated to each other, right? And you're trying to conquer the world. Whereas if instead of doing that, you say, hey, this is similar to my line of business, but instead of me doing it, I'm going to partner with you and let you do that. You do you, I'll do me, but we'll be strong partners. So a great example is, I used to work for Molson Coors Brewing Company, and I don't know how many people know, but the Coors Brewing Company originally created the aluminum can, right? But eventually they got away from producing aluminum cans because they were a brewery, right? So they found a partner who could produce the cans, and they just always had that great relationship. They didn't try and do it all, right? Instead of trying to produce every sort of product that's needed along that manufacturing line, they found partners. It's the same thing in security. If you're really strong in network security, then be strong in network security and find things that are adjacent that make sense. And you say, I'm going to be your network security strategic partner, and I'm going to help you through this. But when it comes to identity and access management, that's not my thing. But I can tell you, here's how we've integrated with this other partner, and here's how our technologies complement each other, or our services, which is even better, complement each other, so that and if you're going to have an MSSP, I would hope your MSSP has that greater vision, and they're bringing in these prepackaged services that are very complementary to one another. And they're saying, look, you need to do A, B, C, D, and E, because these are all lined. They're all their own pieces and parts, but they're all part of the puzzle that make up the overall picture that you're trying to build here. And I think once we can get to that view, instead of company A buying company B, C, D, and E and trying to do it all themselves, because that doesn't usually work out very well in the end.
No, it doesn't. So, kind of looking at the end of the year, a lot of companies are going through budget cuts. And typically, the first department in the business to get a budget cut isn't sales or marketing. It's typically IT and security. What are some of the things you do when you're going through a budget cut to still maintain a strong program?
Again, I think sometimes it's also what can you do with your existing people, process, and technologies to further what you're doing. I find a lot of times we've implemented tools, but we haven't implemented all the capabilities. Are there additional capabilities without additional cost or minimal cost that you could roll out that really strengthen your program? Look at your people. Are your people doing things in an efficient manner? Are they doing things that are really in the right way that can also, again, strengthen your program if you just do things a little bit differently with your people and your processes. And then I also think partnering with the various business functions like sales and marketing to say, hey, what are you guys really focused on right now? Oh, gosh, you're going to start doing that. You're going to start doing direct marketing campaigns. Well, did you realize if you're going to collect personal data on people that we need to protect that? We need to make sure that we do it right. Because if they understand how you can aid them and help them do their piece of work, then they're going to be more willing to obviously help fund whatever needs to be needed. You cannot work in a vacuum. You cannot work in a shell. I think in cybersecurity, one thing that a lot of people struggle with or fail when they're not successful is that they don't take the time and the resources needed to understand what it is that they're supporting. What are those crown jewels? What are those processes? How can we integrate or how can we further those other functions to be successful in what they're doing, and really have that open and honest conversation with them and get them to understand what we do and how it really helps them at the end of the day. Because again, a lot of people still see cybersecurity teams as the know people, you know, you can't do that, but it's like, no, you can do that. And here's how we can do that. And here's how we can do it together. And here's how we can do it faster. And here's how we can maybe even reduce the amount of clicks your users have to participate in. And here's how we can, did you know this? But if you don't take the time to build those relationships and those partnerships, then you're not going to know. You're just going to assume, oh, I need to do these things because that's what a cybersecurity team does.
Speaking of relationships, how do you communicate with the board? Because those are pretty important relationships. I mean, that's the Mac Daddy of all relationships, right? That's like your mother-in-law.
Yes. I focus on telling a good story. You've got to be able to communicate your message in a way that they understand. I think sometimes people think I'm crazy with my analogies, but 9 times out of 10, and the people understand it. They're like, oh, I understand an Uber ride and how that equivalates. Oh, I understand a marriage and how that equivalates and how that makes sense, right? So if you tell a really compelling story, and 2, this just bothers me. When you go in to talk to the board, if all you're doing is going in there to inform them on what's going on with your program, then don't go in there. Okay, you can inform them through an email. You can inform them through a PowerPoint and let them see if they have any questions, right? Again, you've got to go in and tell them what your goal is. Hey guys, my goal for today is to either get you to really understand and support my program and help make sure that every other department is talking about cyber every day in their department meetings, or my goal is to obtain some funding, or my goal is to, you've got to show them what your goal is and what you're presenting. Because if you just dive in and you're like, this month's cyber support, the statistics show that we had blah, they're like, okay, great. I mean, I need to know that, yes, but you're just talking at me, not talking with me. So you also need to understand what's important to them, what's in it for them, what are they there to get out of it from you. Also understand who they are as a person. A lot of boards are public, right? And you can get a list of who's on your board and where they came from and what their background is, and do a little research. It's the same thing with vendors. There's nothing more annoying than a vendor comes in and wants to talk to you about your cybersecurity risks and they have no clue what your company actually does. It's like, how can you talk to me about my risks if you don't understand my business, right? If you don't understand those board members and where they're coming from and their background and sort of how they how you might perceive that they want to be communicated to, you can't tell them that story. So you have to understand those things in order to be effective in your messaging and what you're there to say and why you're there to say it.
So those are some great pointers. Thank you for that. So I got two more questions and want to be respectful of time. So what are some of your best practices to deal with complex security decision making? Tough one, I know.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's really about prioritization. I gotta say, I am a little bit old school. I don't like today's education system, how it's like a pass or a fail because we're too afraid of hurting somebody's fragile psyche and telling them that they got a D.
Participation trophies. That's where it all started. Yeah. It all started with participation trophies.
It did. And I am still an old school grade type of person, right? I need to be graded. I need to know for an A, B, C, D, E, F, or there was no E, right?
There was no E, but today there is no A, B, C, D, or E. Today it's like 1, 2, 3, 4.
How do they know how they rank against other students? I'm sorry, you get in the real world, you're going to be ranked against your coworkers. Not everybody's going to get a 5. Like there are grading systems in most companies. You're either, does not meet expectations or exceeds expectations, right? And there's a scale and people are put on the scale. And same thing with the cybersecurity program. You need to be able to somehow quantify where you are on a scale, whatever scale you decide to measure yourself or whatever way, you need to be able to decide where you sit on that scale and where you need to make improvements. If you're really good in math, you don't need to keep necessarily focusing on math. If you're bad at spelling though, you better take some extra spelling courses. It's the same thing with cybersecurity. If you're really, really good at network security and you think you understand that, you got to keep in mind though where the future is going and where IT is going as a whole and where your company is going. If they're going more cloud, if they're going more SaaS, if they're going more, it changes that. So maybe you do need to retool. You need to relook at your scale and go, oh my goodness, okay, I'm not great at vendor relationships. I'm not good at even things like contract management, which are ancillary to cybersecurity, but I better get good at those things because that's where the future's headed. But you've got to have a way to visually see how you're doing and score yourself and be honest about your scores and say, yeah, we still really suck at this. And this is why that matters, because this is what's important right now. And this is the way trends are going. And we've got to focus here but if you don't have a way to sort of score yourself, you don't really know how you're really doing. That's my personal opinion.
I know that was a difficult question. I can tell you that not a lot of people are able to come through when it comes to complex security decision making. And I feel that's where security programs fail or succeed, is in that moment where you have to make a very, very difficult decision. And unfortunately, in some of the case studies I've seen and talking with other CISOs, that's where a lot of things go to either die or live.
Yeah. Well, you have to be honest too. I think a lot of times we are afraid of our own failures. So we sort of cover up or we don't tell the full truth about something that's going on. Whereas if you go to your executive leadership, if you go to your board and you're like, look, I gotta be honest, we tanked at this. It's horrible, but now we still have this giant risk. And if we don't do something about it, here's what could happen. Then that's what people need to understand. You need to understand that, yes, we might resolve this, but if we resolve this, then we might have some downtime, or we might not have the level of redundancy, but maybe we can address this in the future. But you have to be able to tell the story and be honest about it and say, look, this is where we're not good. And this is where we really need to focus. And I think a lot of times that's the problem is CISOs and people in general, we're afraid to fail. You have to be okay with failing to be good at this and to be able to make the right call and the right decision. And you have to be able to basically be the loud one in the room to say, no, but you have to be flexible too. What I mean is pick your battles. Like if you're always that CISO that's like, oh my God, the sky is falling and we must do all of these. The sky is not falling every day. Let's be honest. The sky does fall. on occasion. So you have to know and be willing to pick the battles that really matter, but you have to be able to make that decision on a lot of things, like where you are, what your posture is, what your business is, what your core goal is, and what's most important to all the people you're supporting, and then be able again to tell that story.
All right, so final question for our awesome interview today. It's my favorite one. If we could take any buzzword, if we could take any buzzword, and we were to take it to the back, put it on its knees, tell it the Lord's Prayer, and give it a shot in the back of the head and bury it in the yard, what buzzword would it be? Did you like that description, Micah?
Yes, that's a really good description. Well, I have several, but lately I would say it's around machine learning and artificial intelligence. I don't think people understand the difference. I don't think people really get what the intent is, what the goal is, what the future is. They're just happy buzzwords. I think a lot of times they're set out there to scare the world, like, oh, Terminator's coming soon, Skynet will be on live in 3 years or whatever. And we're on a journey. We need to be aware of it. We need to prepare for it, but we really need to understand where we are with it and use terms that are get people to understand where we are in that journey, rather than some sort of Hollywood over-publicized, version of AI and machine learning.
Christine, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been awesome. We even went over time, right, Micah? 7 minutes over time, and that's okay. We're not going to edit this down a minute. People will enjoy this entire episode, I promise. I really appreciate your time coming on the show. For those listening, Christine Vanderpool, the Chief Information Security Officer at Florida Crystals in lovely South Florida. Very, very nice place. Full of sun and beautiful beaches and just the best weather in the country, I think. Outside of Southern California. But Southern California gets forest fires and Florida does not. So
that's right, we don't.
Yeah,
well, we do have alligators.
But alligators, like, you see it coming. Right? You see an alligator coming.
They're pretty fast, though, and they climb fences.
They climb fences?
Yes, they can climb a fence.
An alligator can climb a fence? Micah lived in Florida, so.
Yes. When's the last time you've been in South Florida during the summertime outside for more than an hour?
That is true, too.
I would say never, but I've been in the Middle East, and so. We were in Israel in June, and it was like 110 degrees every day.
Oh.
No humidity. Israel has humidity. Israel's like Florida.
Well, my experience in the Middle East, Saudi.
Yeah, Saudi doesn't have humidity. It's godforsaken. Come on, man. All right. I want to say thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give us 5 stars, comment. Make sure you check out our social media pages. We always post who our next guest is, give you the opportunity to submit your questions. So you can always do that through our social media pages at CyberHub Engage on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and also you can do it on our website at cyberhubengage.com. Again, thank you so much to Christine. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. James Azar here. We'll be back with more CISO Talks next Saturday.